Let's take a look now at how to set up a remote access server. First of all, you go to your admin tools, and routing and remote access is always a component of a 2000 or 2003 server. It's not something you can add or remove through the control panel, so it's always there, but what we'll find is that it's always disabled out of the box. So what you'll need to do, whether you're going to do routing or remote access or both, is simply right-click and say you want to configure and enable routing and remote access. So we get a wizard, and the wizard asks us 5 basic questions here as far as what kind of server are we setting up. Are we setting up a remote access dial-up or VPN server, a NAT server, VPN only with NAT, a secure connection, or just a custom configuration? Let's go ahead and choose remote access and click next. And we're just going to do a dial-up connection. And for IP address assignment, we'll cover this in just a moment, so we'll click next on this. And we're going to go ahead and click next in the wizard here again as well. Okay, so it started the service, the routing and remote access service. And this console tends to be one of the lesser intuitive consoles out of all the admin tools you've got. So we'll spend some good time to make sure we're comfortable with the console here. Closing up everything, we basically have the server itself, ports, clients that are currently connected. IP routing has various routing information, remote access policies, and remote access logging. So all these things will be covered in good time. Let's start out with the server itself and look at the server properties. So you just right-click and choose Properties. First tab here specifies whether the computer is a router or a remote access server or both. For this scenario, we're just doing a remote access server, so we'll leave the first checkbox unchecked. The Security tab specifies what kind of authentication this RAS server is allowing, and if you click on Authentication Methods, you can see a full list of all the possible authentication methods. More on this later. For the IP tab, you can specify to enable IP routing. Now, even though we're just a remote access server, just let's say a dial-up server, the IP routing checkbox allows an incoming client to get past the RAS server into the internal network. And that is a default. Normally, you do want to allow that. However, if you uncheck the checkbox, then the client dialing up will only be able to access the RAS server. Down in the middle here, we have IP address assignment, and what we can set up is one of two things. We can have the RAS server go out to DHCP to get the addresses for the clients, or we can have the RAS server statically define an address range. So just to make up a range here, we'll say 10.0.0.1, and end IP address we'll say 10.0.0.100. So what that would do is give us a range of 100 addresses the RAS server could possibly give out to clients that are dialing up in this scenario. They want to be careful that if you give out these addresses that there isn't perhaps some other internal client also using the same address pool. So here we have our statically assigned address range here. There's 100 addresses, the subnet mask, etc. So again, you could choose DHCP or you could set up your own address pool. Going on to the fourth tab here, PPP tab, multi-link allows you to aggregate connections. So for example, if you had more than one dial-up link or more than one ISDN dial-up, for example, you could combine those two into one logical connection. In a sense, multiply your bandwidth. The second checkbox here, Dynamic Bandwidth Allocation Protocol, BAP or BACP, these allow you to dynamically add or remove links to your aggregated multi-link connections. LCP is often misunderstood. LCP is basically there for callback. So if you want your RAS server to call back a dial-up client, you would certainly want to make sure this check is checked. And then software compression if you want to compress information going across the link. Finally, the logging tab, you can log events that are going on with your RAS server. Of course, you can do more or less. The more you log, the more events you're going to have. And just it depends on if you're troubleshooting or not really. Normally, you just log the errors and warnings. So that's your RAS server properties. Let's check out the rest of the console then. We've got ports. Ports signify how many incoming connections you could have. Now you notice we have a total of 10 VPN ports. So even though we just said we wanted a dial-up server, there's always actually 10 by default, 10 VPN ports available. If there were a modem installed, then there would be a modem port as well for incoming dial-up connections. Remote access clients lists which clients are currently connected, and right now we don't have any. IP routing is for routing information. A lot of this will be covered later. Remote access policies deal with not authentication. If you recall, authentication was in RAS properties. So on the security tab, authentication says that I want to know that you are who you say you are, which is basically username and password. Remote access policy says, well, I know who you are. You've put in the correct username and password. And the question now is, should you get in? That's authorization. So this will be covered in more detail later. And then finally, there's some more logging information. So you can set up more advanced logging or various formats for your logging, time periods, etc.